Okay, thank you very much for my beloved audience. Now we have a very honorable guest, Mr. Arnaud Develay. Yeah, is it right if I call you Develay?
It's fine. It's
Fine.
my name.
Okay. Arnaud Develay, international legal consultant, trained by former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, participated in the legal committee of behalf of former Iraq President Saddam Hussein, assisted in the defense of Liz Ramirez Sanchez, spent over 2 years documenting the effect of sanctions in Syria, and the last participated as international observer during the 2022 referendum in Donbass. It's quite very interesting, Mr. Develay. So, Mr. Develay, I want to ask you about the issue of Africa riots now related to the Ukraine war. Yeah, we know that the most African countries were French colonies until now. Colonialism has not ended. Surprisingly, African countries put up a resistance against France at the same time as the Ukraine issue. Russia seemed to be a hero for Africa. So before getting there, I want to ask you first, what the relation between African countries and France? Is colonialism really still going on today? What's your comment?
Well, some have called it a variation on the colonial model. To be sure, we are dealing with neo-colonial policies. If our listeners are familiar with, I would point them out to Frantz Fanon works on the issue. Frantz Fanon died very early. He was 36 years old, but he was a very prolific writer. He was trained in the dialectical Marxist school of thought.
Mm-hmm.
And what he explained essentially was that in the 1960s, after the official departure of the French from a slew of African nations, mostly Western African nation, what we call today the Sahel region. Those arrangements, so to speak, were reframed according to what is commonly known as the France-Afrique system. And the France-Afrique system essentially was initially overseen, supervised by a close of General de Gaulle, Colonel Focard, and it consisted in basically co-opting African elites, often through the Masonic system. The Masonic system had its branches in Africa, and those individuals, those compradors, they were called comprador, as was what we happened to see after the Spaniards allegedly abandoned their own colonial empire in South America. They resorted on the comprador class, people who basically, let's call it this way, betray their country under a veneer of sovereignty. They basically sell out the farm for below value, below market value to their former colonial master. And so this is the system essentially which has kept former French Africa, former French-controlled Africa in a state of subservience, dependency, and has allowed for the French to extract unbelievable quantity of natural resources of all kinds for like a dime on the money, essentially. And Jacques Chirac himself, not long before he passed away, had referred to it in saying that if it weren't for African resources, France would be a third-rate nation. At the time, the declaration, the statement kind of went unnoticed. But we can assume that this will now take on a whole new significance as France is increasingly, and this fact, and in this time around, is effectively being ousted from its former colonies, owing to basically a thoroughly deep resentment toward this relation. African people don't hate France. They hate French elites and their own elites who have collaborated. And you have to keep in mind that there was no less than between 50 and 70 coups d'etat in those former French colonial. Some of the most famous involving Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso in 1987. He only had 4 years in power before they took him out. So what we have now are the descendants of people like Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, or Niger, should I say. And except that this time around, there's a coordination between those different Pan-African movements. And they are now coordinating on a level which did not exist before, so as to prevent precisely what the outcome that befell people like Sankara, and to make sure that the state is reinforced. You initially have to close the border. You have to expose all the NGOs, Western NGOs, and influence front groups like this. The American use the US AID and the NED, which are National Endowment for Democracy, which are essentially the the state, plus a whole slew of NGOs working in collaboration with the state government and the George Soros Foundation, so Open Society Foundation. So the French have bought into this system as well. So it's a combo of NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, and also cover stories bearing on what we see in the Middle East, whereupon through the use of proxy Takfirist groups, which are completely, it's like a closed circle environment. They are recruited, equipped, trained, deployed, and used against people that either France or the US, it depends on who you talk, what the context is, to take out genuine sovereign-oriented people in the countries that they want to keep maintaining and exert control over. And then under the cover of fighting terrorism, they enter with their proxy on site with some kind of security arrangements, which allow them to deploy troops and open bases there, where they can, if the need requires it, intervene and protect their interests there, literally, like American companies and or French companies, depending again on the country. So this is the neo-colonial template, and this is what we've seen in place for, I would say, 60 years now, ever since the official decolonization process started in the 1960s. Now, to your question about Russia having a role there, well, Russia, and going back to the Soviet Union, because this is nothing new, the Soviet Union was a big supporter of decolonial
Sorry,
movements.
Mr. Develay, before we go to Putin's role in Africa, so I want to more deep understanding about the situation in Africa and also in France today. You know that France is a part of Western, like United States, and today we know that the U.S. empire declined. So, do you think this moment we can say that France as a part of empire uh, decline to? What do you think?
Is France as a part of the U.S. empire declining?
Yes.
Yes,
Be-
because as I was saying earlier, they are being ousted from their former colonial possessions. And I mean this time thoroughly. So if they want to keep doing business with those former colonial states or clients or possessions, they will have to basically pay the real market value for those resources.
Mm.
And that's going to increase
Why is so?
significantly.
Why is so people of Africa, yeah, so very huge to anti-France, but not happen in the maybe 1 or 2 years before? Why that this kind of moment is it's like it's good momentum for people of Africa to express what really happened there.
Well, I think it's always been there. It's just that it's constantly being suppressed.
Mm,
This is what you need to understand. It's not like now there are moments where those anti-neo-colonial movements gain in ascendancy. Uh, but this is conjectural. This is by and large a movement that is always present, and there's many African Pan-African leaders who are constantly beating the pavement, trying to educate people about the exploitation of the continent. It's just that it's just a matter of it coming all together and having a partnership with countries like Russia and China, which allow them to benefit from a platform where they can express themselves and they can have their voice being heard widely, and in so doing, this creates some movement within militaries of those countries that are seeking to break away from that exploitation system. And,
mm,
it's just all a matter of coordination afterward. You have to coordinate. And then you have to share intelligence. You have to make sure that if you hear or gather intelligence that your neighbor might be about to undergo a coup attempt, which reverses all the gains, that you get to intervene. This is what we saw in the case of Niger, where Mali and Burkina Faso immediately said if through ECOWAS they attempt to remove the new authorities in place, we will intervene.
mm.
And so this is the new element that we weren't seeing before.
Okay, now we talk about Putin. How is Africa's future influenced by Putin now? It's look like unintended consequence because Putin's move only in Ukraine war, but now relate to the Africa. It's not in the plan, I
Well,
think.
but we have to start from the beginning, and the beginning is that uh, as a main premise, the Ukraine crisis played the role of an accelerator of history.
Mm,
So all those processes that I described, while they were into existence, it required the spark to get the engine going. And Ukraine did just that because, as we know, it's not a Ukraine-Russia conflict. It's a NATO-Russia conflict with Ukraine as a proxy.
mm,
And in so doing, people realized all around the world that the emperor had no clothes, i.e., NATO was a paper tiger.
mm,
And this emboldened resistance around the world and led to an insurrection that it lit a fire in the heart of people yearning for emancipation from the West. And despite all its control over UN instruments and agencies and mechanisms and their own mainstream media, the West is now isolated. The West represents 15% of the world population. We just saw at the General Assembly in New York that the entire world is fed up with the Ukraine file. They have their own file and their own interest. And
Mm,
Russia is a major partner. Russia is represents 1/6 of the world landmass. It is a completely autonomous
mm,
phenomenon as far as a nation state is concerned, in that it covers 11 time zones and it is completely self-sufficient. And some, it can sell to everybody everything that everybody needs: gas, oil, potassium, rare metal, agriculture, cereals, armament, expertise. It
mm,
has a soft power element also. People come to Russia as they used to come to the Soviet Union to get an education. It's a different model, but one that does not impose a relation of subservience as the Western power have been fond of doing.
mm,
Russia calls for the multipolarity, which is the equal ties of and relations between countries with full respect for their sovereignty and their cultural distinction, what makes them who they are. Russia does not attempt to impose a model on its partners. It just wants to have trade and good, cordial, neighborly relations, and that's a
mm.
game changer.
Okay, Mr. Develay, because your background is international law, I want to ask you about the term we use here about the invasion. Okay, do you think that African country know, yeah, about the term of invasion that used by NATO? Or maybe it's just like they never think that that because of what the West doing, the NATO doing before, the same thing as United States did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya. So what do you think about the in the mind of African? Do you think that Putin do invasion to Ukraine? What do you think?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't think Africans really care about the intricacies of who started what. What they know is that, as you rightly underlined, it is the West, the last 20 years at least, that has been starting conflict and destroying countries, not Russia. And so when Western media shriek that Russia invaded Ukraine, the illegal invasion of Ukraine, the uncalled and unprovoked, quote
Mm,
unquote, invasion of Ukraine, was Russia's deed, uh, instinctively and automatically and immediately they get leery about this narrative.
mm,
Now, I'm not going to get into the legal intricacy of the situation that led to Russia's police operation in Ukraine, because if there's one a key term that should be highlighted is that Russia acted basically exercising its police powers granted to it by the Minsk Agreement, i.e., Resolution 2202,
mm,
in its Annex number 2, allows Russia, in the light of the bad faith expressed by France, Germany, and Kiev in that matter, to take matters into its own hand, recognize the sovereignty of the Luhansk and Donetsk Republic, as well as the two regions of Kherson and Zaporozhye, and respond favorably to those entities, those new subjects, those new states. Because if you look at the Montevideo Convention as to what defines a state, there are four criteria. And if you apply those criteria to those four entities, they fit. They have their own sovereignty, their own distinction, and they control. I mean, they have their own borders. As such, they entered into a bilateral agreement called the Mutual Assistance Agreement, which called for military support. Not unlike what happened in Syria when President Bashar al-Assad invited the Russian Federation and the Islamic Republic of Iran to come and provide assistance in combating terrorism. It's the same thing. It's just
mm,
happened that there were referendum organized within those new state entities, bearing on attachment to the Russian Federation. And the referendum was held, as you pointed out, in September of last year, where the result was that people overwhelmingly, as ethnic Russians, opted to return home, as they said it themselves, after 8 years of constant shelling by their erstwhile, compatriots, because basically Kiev bombarded its own compatriots. And so it has lost the right to call itself a state. To be a state is not a fixed concept. You need to act as a responsible state, and you need to fulfill your international obligation. If you fail to do so, you lose those rights to the extent that a more powerful state may intervene. And in the sake of Article 33 of the UN and Article 2, Paragraph 3 of the UN, which is to, as much as possible, seek peaceful means to uh, destabilizing situation, at some point you have to step in and whistle the end of the break. You have to bring the kids into account and have them stop, creating a mess. So this is what Russia did. And this is the apanage of the great powers. Russia was very patient. Russia never, at any moment during the Minsk Accord process, pretended to unilaterally claim those territories as part of its own territorial integrity. It gave a chance for the process to work. Unfortunately, as we found out last fall, when former French President Hollande and former German Chancellor Merkel, they admitted that the whole thing had been shenanigans. The whole thing had been a ploy to allow Ukraine to rearm so as to forcefully retake those territories, despite having displayed callous violation of the rights of the people living in those territories. So now that we know, on top of it, that the Ukrainian regime is substantially colored by neo-Nazism, and that neo-Nazis basically, as history tells us, look at Slavic people as underlings, as Übermensch, or should I say Untermensch, then it is not surprising that in those conditions, Russia would aim to prevent what would have most likely turned into a bloodbath.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Develay, it is very complicated if we analyze what happened in Africa
I know.
related to the
So
Russia. And
this is I know.
I want to elaborate. You know that the
Yeah.
France is a part of NATO, Africa is a part of BRICS. So a BRICS is a economic alliance, NATO is a military alliance, and Russia, I think, have no military alliance anymore. Pakta Wasarawa is doesn't exist anymore. So in this situation, so do you think that like the country outside, outside of the NATO, member of NATO, just like Indonesia is not member of NATO, and also not a member of Pakta Warsaw too, is far away, and also maybe some Asian and Africa country is outside of the conflict between NATO and Pakta Warsaw, and now become a great Russia. So do you think that from the perspective of international law, still that can help, to the peace process? Do you still have hope that the law, international law, can help for to resolve the conflict? What do you think?
Okay. Well, I would say first of all that international law requires enforcers to be respected. This requires a balance between equally or comparably equally powerful states. The problem is the last 30 years, we've had one superpower running amok and selecting international law to its whims. In so doing, whereupon they had the opportunity to set an example by abiding by international law, which they themselves helped put
Break the law.
together in the way of
Break the
World War
law.
II. Yeah. They set a precedent in lawlessness. And so they undermined the rule of law and they created chaos around the world. And so this is actually the most regrettable and unfortunate effect of this aggressive US foreign policy the last 25 years. And I would say that this explained in substantial part why the US does not refer to the UN Charter anymore these days. It refers to the rule-based order. Nobody's ever heard of the rule-based order. What is the rule-based order? So they're coming up with their own words. And so they're acting out of a completely made-up paradigm. So what we have to understand is that in the West, states have been subsumed by private interest, corporate interest, mostly in the pharmaceutical and defense industry. And those powerful interests have hijacked state institutions and made them theirs and subservient to their needs. So what we're dealing essentially is a mafia mentality. And some books have been written about it the last few years, because those criminal organizations that we tend to see in those Hollywood movies, that kind of criminality has fusioned with the official state power that we've come to know as the political class of countries to become one. They've merged. And so in so doing, it's not surprising that the mafia, like the criminal elements, are in power. And since they are a mafia-like organization, they're not going to abide by the rule of law if the latter is deemed to present an obstacle to their interest and their goals. And so that's why we need multipolarity more than ever before. We need to have a balance of power, because only with the balance of power can we have a reframing of what has been working up until not that long ago.
Okay.
And bring it back in function. But might does
Mr.
not fly.
Develay, now we can talk about the multipolarity in the next session, I think. But my last question: what lesson can be learned for France? Actually, do you have any suggestion for your country?
Well, I would suggest that France, first of all, leave the European Union and leave NATO, because what we have with NATO is a situation where through Article 5, you might find yourself involved in a conflict in which you have no bonds, essentially. So France should reassert and recover its sovereignty and become what General de Gaulle was calling for, a non-aligned movement country, which can serve as a bridge to and facilitate, communication between blocs. This is France's vocation as a middle-sized power. Obviously, the France of the 18th century is gone, but France can still be, if we take on what France was in the 1960s, in that sense, a respected power, which speaks in its name and not on behalf of some master, as we see today with France's subservience to Washington. And only then will France recover the respect that it has lost And I'm not worried economically about, France recovering. We have always produced technologies which have allowed France to be energy independent. We may have to now pay the uranium from Niger at the proper value, but we have to understand that uh, France's ties to Africa beyond the neo-colonial aspect of it
Yes.
is very strong, and
Mm.
this is not going to go away. France has the second maritime domain in the
Yes.
world,
Yes.
second largest. So there's a lot of things that can be done to open trade zones and some kind of commonwealth like the English have maintained. And you can trade, all those waters essentially, whether it's the French Polynesia, Nouvelle Caledonie, Fortuna. France has a presence on all the oceans. It's the only country that has that.
Mm.
So it should refocus and develop those zones and sign trade agreements with countries in the area, respectively, and realign, completely rethink
Mm.
its economic model alongside those lines, as opposed to that of exploiting the resources of Africa in a way that leaves the African people forced to flee their country and go to France, which creates
Mm.
more problems.
Yes, Mr. Develay, thank you very much. Your explanation is very incredible. You, as a citizen of France, said very powerfully that your country, France, actually not in the sovereignty state. So you suggest to France to get away, from NATO and Europe, to become in order to become a sovereignty state. And I think our discussion is getting warm, getting hot and very more complicated. I hope that you can join in another discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Devalay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, see
It'll
you.
be my pleasure.
See
Bye
you.
bye.